I've always been a distant observer of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. I've always known it was a tabletop miniature wargame, but to be completely honest, I was more interested in the video games. My first true direct exposure to 40k was the Dawn of War real-time strategy games by Relic Entertainment. I played through the first game, but it was Dawn of War 2 that really sucked up a lot more of my time. More recently, however, I played Boltgun, which is a boomer shooter featuring a more old-school aesthetic, and even more recently than that, I played Space Marine 2. And while going through Space Marine 2, I realized that I only have just the most basic of basic knowledge about this universe. And despite my interest in it, I've never fully committed to actually diving into the deep end. For most people, that probably means spending an obscene amount of money on miniatures, but honestly, I was interested in the stories. Thus, I started doing research on the best 40k novels. I knew there was a metric fuck ton of them, but obviously not all of them are going to be great, so I needed to zero in on the highest quality starting point I could find. My research led me to 3 potential starting points: the Horus Heresy, the Eisenhorn Omnibus by Dan Abnett, or The Founding, which is an omnibus of Gaunt's ghost novels and short stories, also by Dan Abnett. I assume most people within the 40k community would probably tell me to pick The Founding or Eisenhorn, because the Horus Heresy seems to be better left until after you gain some foundational knowledge first. The basic gist of the setting and how things work within it. However, thanks to my experience with the games and the occasional YouTube video and Lexicanum article, I felt like I knew enough to go straight to the Horus Heresy, which, to my newcomer eyes, seemed like more or less the backbone series of the published lore, considering it has over 50 entries, ranging from novels to short story anthologies. So I took the slightly less popular route, I think, and went into the Horus Heresy first. And I do not regret it. I finished Horus Rising, loved it, and I was committed to continuing. Luckily for me, it seems to be widely recommended that if you do begin the Horus Heresy, you should do the first 5 novels anyway, because the first 4 are directly tied together, and the 5th, which is Fulgrim by Graham McNeill, is just a good entry on its own. So that's how I planned it out for myself too. It really shocked me how quickly I carved through these books. It only took about 10 days total to get through Horus Rising and False Gods, which is lightning fast for me. For most books, I can barely muster the focus to pull off maybe 20 pages a day, but I was easily tripling, sometimes quadrupling that. Then I went on a 3-week vacation to Japan where I hoped to get some reading done, and I did, but not nearly enough. So I finished Galaxy in Flames when I returned. I'm going to go over my thoughts and impressions of these 3 stories in the order I read them. Now, I imagine most of you who clicked on this are probably already familiar with these novels and are just watching or listening because you want to hear about a new reader's thoughts. But in the off chance that you are also unfamiliar with Warhammer 40k and are watching out of curiosity, I'll try to talk about the books in a way you can hopefully still understand, so I'm not spouting a bunch of terms you're not familiar with without explaining. But keep in mind, there will be spoilers in this video. It's all fair game, including when major characters die, so you have been warned. Also, since I don't remember every single detail because I didn't decide to make a video until sometime after reading these books, I'm also going to get some help from the Lexicanum articles summarizing the books to help refresh my memory too. So, without any further ado, let's talk about the first 3 entries of Horus Heresy. So first is Horus Rising by Dan Abnett. He is basically 40k's lead writer, so to speak, which had a very interesting starting point. A quick overview of the conflict we are diving directly into. A planet proclaiming to be the real Terra, or Earth, and a ruler proclaiming to be the real Emperor, thus starting a rebellion against the larger Imperium of Man. In fact, the book's first line is a famous bait and switch. I was there the day Horus slew the Emperor, which refers to the pretender of this different planet, but would end up being somewhat prophetic later. To prevent a larger war from erupting, the Imperium Legion of the Luna Wolves sends over an envoy led by one of their most respected Astartes, also known as Space Marines, named Sejanus. But sadly, the meeting ends with his murder, which of course sets off the Luna Wolves, who storm in and devastate the planet. This event is important because it's basically ground zero for the entire rest of the heresy. Sejanus, despite never showing up in person in the book and only appearing through the recollections of other characters, was a beloved figure in the Luna Wolves, which is led by Primarch Horus, the favored son of the true Emperor of Man. And his death basically fucks up a lot of stuff and serves as the spark that lights the flame leading to the heresy. The main character we follow throughout not only this book, but across the first 3 books in total, is Captain Garviel Loken, another respected Astartes of the Luna Wolves, and we see his relationship with multiple other Luna Wolves, his invitation to Horus's personal group of counselors called the Mournival, as Sejanus was a member and thus a spot was now open, and most importantly, we watch Loken's belief in the Imperium and especially in Horus be challenged more and more over time. But that's mostly in the second and third books, though you can see the seeds being planted here in Horus Rising. While Loken is the primary Astartes character we follow, we also keep a close eye on the few key human characters as well, like Kirill Sinderman, an old iterator or public speaker, Mercedes Olaton, a documentarist, Euphrates Keeler, a remembrancer, which are typically writers and photographers, and Ignace Carcassy, a poet and one of the few people who somewhat openly realizes that the Crusade is actually pretty horrible and fucked up. And by following multiple humans alongside an Astartes, we get a variety of POVs across Horus Rising and the first few books overall, which is a smart move because, generally speaking, humans tend to be a little bit deeper than Astartes, because Astartes are bred to have a singular purpose in being warriors with undying loyalty to the Emperor. And because of this, most Astartes have comparable character arcs in which they slowly question or double down on that loyalty. Now, that being said, Loken still manages to be an interesting character because he's quite a stubborn guy who is set in his ways, which makes it all the more impactful when he begins to question things. And because questioning the morality or usefulness or purpose of things is the root of so many characters' journeys, there's a lot of philosophizing in this story. There's a lot of discussions about where boundaries are, if boundaries exist, and where one purpose ends and another begins, etc. The first book is also dedicated to explaining what a lot of concepts are, like what it means to bring a conquered world into compliance and how they do that, and why Horus needs the Mournival. Because you would think that as the Emperor's favored son and the War Master of the Imperium, he would simply throw his weight around as much as he wanted to, but no, he's clever at politicking and uses the Mournival to also play a role in being the harsh judges to others so Horus can swoop in and be the gracious and kind leader. But that in itself does not mean he's super selfish or malicious. This is Horus before he was taken over by the powers of chaos, so he was still an all-around thoughtful leader and genuinely loved by his followers. Speaking of chaos, a very important event that actually plants the seed of questioning things in the mind of Loken, Keeler, and Sinderman is an incident where a Luna Wolf stumbles upon a sort of gate or portal into the warp, and it infects his mind and physically transforms him into a grotesque abomination of chaos that rampages and manages to kill a few people before finally being put down. And because nobody had ever seen anything like this before, it shakes everyone who saw it to the core. It totally changes the trajectory of their lives. After that, we move towards the second act of the book, which properly introduces the Emperor's children, everyone's favorite legion, as I would eventually find out. Here we meet a few other key players in this early stage of the Horus Heresy, Saul Tarvitz and Lucius, and eventually their bona fide, grade A piece of shit commander, Eidolon. They're stuck on a planet called Murder because they were summoned by a call for reinforcements from the Blood Angels. The reason the Blood Angels need reinforcements in the first place is because this planet is fucked up with extremely tall, thick stalks of grass and massive trees, and you can't see shit, including the giant war spiders with razor blades for arms. The coolest moments of this act are Torgadon, friend of Loken and another Mournival member, telling Eidolon to fuck off with his bullshit, and we get a surprisingly early introduction to Sanguinius, who stops by and basically shows off how cool and chill and handsome and charismatic and sexy and smart he is. Then the Luna Wolves and Blood Angels wage war on Murder against the Megarachnids to eradicate them, because why wouldn't you at this point? While, and after, all of this is going down, Keeler, who had basically been missing for a while now, is checked up on by Loken, and after he leaves her be, it's shown that she has discovered a religion that worships the Emperor of Mankind as a god, and uses this newfound belief to cope with the horrible shit she saw at the Whisperhead Mountains, where that one Luna Wolf transformed into a horrible creature. Similarly, Cinderman, who also saw all that stuff, became deeply obsessed with the event and tried to research any similar instance of this transformation happening in the past, leading him to read through an insane amount of books in a short amount of time. And Loken discovers a lodge medal in the infected Space Marine's belongings, which leads him to confront other Luna Wolves about lodges because they're allegedly potentially heretical gatherings, when in fact they're usually just openly secret meetings where men of the Imperium can meet up and hang out without throwing around their rank, which is not an inherently bad idea. But all these events are what cause the cracks to show in their own beliefs. Now finally, we have the third act of the book, where Horus and the Luna Wolves encounter the Interrex, which is basically another race of humans who have been long separated from Earth. Some Astartes want to kill them because they're technically still Xenos, even though they trace their origins back to the same Terra that the Imperium is from, but thankfully Horus is diplomatic and wishes to create a relationship with them. Turns out, the Interrex are the ones who created the musical signals that the Imperium had been picking up around Murder, because the Interrex had previously visited Murder but decided to leave it alone. Because why would anyone be stupid enough to fuck with a planet inhabited by huge spiders with swords for legs? But anyway, Horus meets the Interrex leaders with the intention of getting them to join the Imperium, but of course, if that diplomacy actually succeeded, we likely would not have the entire rest of the Horus Heresy, so of course, things get fucked up pretty quick. Turns out, while this important meeting is going on, someone steals an important Xeno weapon, a sword, from the Interrex's armory, and Horus takes the blame even though he truly had nothing to do with it. This event causes Horus to express a bit of frustration at his position as War Master, and with some reluctance, it's decided that they have to go to war with the Interrex, who are, to some degree, their fellow man. Anyone reading the book can instantly guess that the sword, called the Anathame, was stolen by some dickhead piece of shit named Erebus, who is a chaplain of the Word Bearers Legion, yet has been hanging around Horus a lot for some fucking reason, so the moment he shows up in the book, he basically has a massive, glowing neon sign of an arrow pointing down at him, reading "Suspicious Guy Right Here." Now the key thing about this third act is that it really shines a light on the fact that even though we're 30,000 years into the future, the Imperium still does not know what chaos is. Not the word, but the forces of chaos. Loken heard it a couple times throughout the story, but didn't understand what it was referring to, and Cinderman didn't really find any hard evidence of its existence in all the books that he read. The forces of chaos were still somehow unknown to the vast majority, and this ignorance plays a very, very big part in how the heresy progresses. My second read, and the second book of the Horus Heresy, is False Gods by Graham McNeill, and this is one where we see, up close and personal, when and how Horus falls to the influence of chaos. The last book was basically a long prologue that sets the stage and plants the seeds, but False Gods is where the heresy truly takes that first step. After wiping out the Interrex, Horus decides to make some aesthetic changes to the Luna Wolves by transforming their associated colors, iconography, and name to the Sons of Horus. Now, this move was pretty much done to hopefully improve Horus's standing and the standing of his legion among the rest of the Imperium, because he feels he wasn't getting the respect he deserved from being named War Master by the Emperor. Their first order of business is to head to a planet called Davin, joined by a selection of word-bearers, including Lord Dickhead himself, Erebus. Furthermore, a noblewoman from Terra named Petronella Vivar, is summoned to be Horus's personal documentarist so that his life and career as War Master is committed to paper for posterity. It's not all good news and positive vibes though, because Erebus, being the sneaky bastard he is, mentions that Davin's assigned governor, Eugen Temba, has denounced the Imperium and turned against Horus, with whom he is, or was, close friends. Of course, Horus is angry about this, so he rushes to Davin's moon, where Temba has decided to hole up. Meanwhile, Ignace Carcassy, the poet from the previous book, is the first person to truly catch on that Erebus is trying to manipulate Horus in some way, and thankfully, he's able to confide in Loken about this information. But Abaddon, another member of the Mournival, scolds Ignace for thinking such things and even criticizes Loken for hanging around Remembrancers at all. Now, this is a somewhat reoccurring theme in how you can tell an Astartes is an asshole or not. If they hate Remembrancers and think they're useless and can't be trusted or used for anything, they are probably a piece of shit. In these handful of books I've read, it's always the dudes who hate Remembrancers who end up being the worst, and I understand why this is a trend. Remembrancers are normal people with mostly normal jobs. Writers, photographers, artists, musicians, so if someone with power, and who isn't even taken over by the powers of chaos yet, hates them, then chances are they just hate normal people. Anyway, Horus and multiple companies of the Sons of Horus head over to Davin's moon, and Davin's moon is a gnarly place. It's a disgusting, rotting swamp where everything is decaying and shitty. But the weird part is that it's not supposed to be like this. It's supposed to be a lush forest. Of course, that's because chaos is infecting it and transforming it into the worst version of itself. But no one in this story knows this except Erebus and the Word-Bearers, because they're pretty obviously pulling the strings here. It's kinda already shady how easily Erebus can convince Horus to do pretty much anything. It kinda makes you wonder why no one noticed sooner. Either way, Davin's moon is a total shithole now that's also covered in zombies. Actual, honest-to-God zombies that kind of fuck up the Sons of Horus pretty good because they've killed a lot of aliens, but they never fought any damn zombies before, so it was a learning experience to say the least. After lots of struggling and lots of casualties, they eventually make it to Temba's flagship, where Horus walks in to hopefully confront his former friend, but instead finds a horrific, bloated, disfigured monstrosity that used to be Temba, and somehow he's in possession of the Anathame, the weapon taken from the Interrex. Horus and Temba fight, Temba dies. Horus is wounded but is able to disable the weird broadcast reanimating the corpses, so they finally all just go limp and truly die. Horus suddenly collapses outside the flagship, and this causes everyone to go batshit insane. The mere thought of the War Master of the Imperium dying seems ridiculous, so when it becomes a likelihood, the Sons of Horus understandably freak the fuck out. The problem with them freaking out, however, is when they return to the fleet to treat him, they are in such a blind hurry that they start beating and stomping on normal humans who are in their way, resulting in a grief-stricken massacre. Ignace and Mercedes look on, and Ignace in particular is really pissed off by this and fully intends to stoke the flames of unrest by eventually getting people to demand accountability. And Keeler takes the chance to pass around religious pamphlets. Horus spends his time under the care of apothecaries who can't really do anything to help him, so he asks Petronella write down his valediction, including many secrets of his upbringing as a Primarch and his relationship with his brother Primarchs. Loken and Torgadon decide to go back to Temba's flagship to find the weapon that wounded Horus, hopefully to find some answers in how to treat him. And they also discovered that it is the anatheme that was stolen from the Interrex, so Loken finally realizes that Erebus has been manipulating things the whole damn time he's been around, which was pretty fucking obvious from the start. I would like to say better late than never, but no, by being late to this realization, the train of heresy is going full speed ahead. Because now, Erebus is manipulating the other two members of the Mournival into taking Horus's body over to the Serpent Lodge on Davin, in hopes that its mystical properties will heal the War Master. Now, I think most people would be hesitant to trust something called the Serpent Lodge. You might as well put Horus in a machine called the Skull Pulverizer 5000 or something, but I guess they were pretty damn desperate. Another point is that they also conveniently tossed away their anti-magic beliefs as soon as the imminent death of someone they admired needed them to. Horus is now chilling inside the temple where he dreams he's in a lush green meadow, and tragically enough, not only does he realize he's pretty much dead, but he also accepts it at first. Horus was totally willing to accept his passing and peacefully explore in this verdant, peaceful afterlife. But of course, if he did that, the heresy wouldn't have happened, so we gotta have that dickhead Erebus come in, forcing his way into Horus's vision, disguised as the dead Sejanus, and manipulating Horus into abandoning the Emperor's crusade by lying that the Emperor threw away the crusade to instead chase after godhood, and by showing Horus that the Emperor used the forces of the warp to make the Primarchs. And while all this shit is happening, Loken visits Cinderman and learns about the connection between the Serpent Lodge and the forces of chaos. Shocker. And Ignace writes damning poetry about the massacre caused by the hysterical Astartes and decides to pass it around to other staff. Then Keeler is brought to Cinderman by Torgadon, and the old man decides he's not so into the whole secular creed he was basically told to follow his whole life, and now wants to know more about viewing the Emperor as a god. Searching for more answers, they start to translate the Book of Lorgar, a book so fucking evil it practically glows purple, and they accidentally summon a fucking chaos demon, and Chief Astropath Ingmei Singh steps in to help. But the only way they kill the creature is when Keeler performs a miracle by somehow channeling the Emperor's power like he's a fucking stand and blasting the demon away with a big ol' ray of godly energy, which then puts her in a conveniently timed coma. Now back in Horus's own coma, he meets with another visitor, his brother Magnus, who is trying to save him from Erebus's manipulations by revealing his identity under the Sejanus disguise. But Horus, now being a dumb asshole because he's so confused and annoyed, decides to not trust his brother over this weird dickhead he barely knows, and in a flagrant show of ego and pride, he decides that he will betray the Emperor. The vision ends, Horus wakes up, and now the heresy truly begins. The first thing the Legion does is deliberately seek out war with another race of humans called the Orician Technocracy. Leaders of the Technocracy meet with Horus with total intention of being diplomatic, but Horus murks them anyway and starts the war under false pretenses to take their technology and give it to the Mechanicum to curry favor with them in his betrayal. Meanwhile, the members of the Fleet Lodge try to convince Torgadon to execute Loken in order to appease Varvarus, an Imperial Army commander who wants to hold the Astartes accountable for the Embarkation Deck massacre, but he doesn't play along. Primarch Angron, a berserker freak who apparently has a fucking chunk of his brain missing, we'll learn more about that later I suppose, joins the war, and it goes on for several violent months. When the Technocracy is finally cornered and about to surrender peacefully, Angron ruins it and starts slaughtering people, forcing the Astartes to massacre all the surrendering Technocracy soldiers, but Varvarus is killed in the battle. Now that the stage is set, Horus begins the first steps of his true betrayal by having multiple people killed, specifically Ignace for his poems and Petronella for knowing too much, which of course is entirely his fault, so her only real crime is being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Ignace's death is passed off as a suicide though, but obviously anyone with 2 functioning brain cells would question the validity of reports of the guy leading a quiet rebellion against a more powerful entity suddenly offing himself. You would think Ignace would be smart enough to put a little disclaimer in his poems that he is not suicidal. But anyway, with all this bullshit going on, Loken and Torgadon agree to fight this evil spreading across their legion, while Horus is ready for this master betrayal plan at the Istvan system. And this concludes False Gods, and it was loaded with non-stop escalation. I enjoyed it, although I would still say I enjoyed Horus Rising a tad more. With the first 2 books of the Horus Heresy being written by 2 different authors, I feel like the difference in prose is more obvious, especially when you read them back to back, close together like I did. Dan Abnett's writing style kinda made me feel like Horus Rising was being narrated by an Astartes, whereas Graham McNeil's writing style makes me feel like False Gods is being narrated by a normal human, which is not necessarily a complaint because I still enjoy it for the most part, though it does make me miss Abnett's prose a bit more. I feel like his style and characterizations fit my own expectations of the tone of this world better. Now granted, this is just my thoughts at the time of reading, and these were my first 2 40k books ever. If I went back and reread them after getting several more books under my belt, I don't know if I would feel that difference again, or maybe I would feel it even stronger. Either way, those are simply my first impressions. Moving on, my third read is Galaxy in Flames by Ben Counter, 3rd book in the Horus Heresy. And this is where shit really hits the fan for the first time. If you thought the brutality with the technocracy was as nasty as this shit was going to get, you would be wrong. With Horus now officially on the side of chaos, he conspires further to rebel against his father, the Emperor, and he manages to get a few of his brother Primarchs to join him, namely Angron of the World Eaters, as mentioned, Mortarion of the Death Guard, and Fulgrim of the Emperor's Children. These are the first 3 to ally with Horus right out the gate, and they all decide to head to the Istvan system under the pretense of quelling a different rebellion, still feigning allegiance to the Emperor. Meanwhile, the still comatose Euphrates Keeler is being worshipped as a sort of saint by people who hear of her ability to channel the Emperor's power, and Kirill Cinderman is among them. Horus is aware of her though, and in order to keep her safe, Cinderman asks for assistance from Titus Cassar and Jonah Arikan of the Legio Mortis, a Titan legion that is in control of gigantic mechs, because you gotta have mechs in this setting. It wouldn't be right without them. So they go to rescue Keeler from imminent doom, only to run into Petronella's old bodyguard, Maggard, who basically worshipped the Astartes, especially Horus, and swore loyalty to him, and was given genetic enhancements in return. And his attack is stopped by Keeler, who is barely conscious, and they get the fuck out of there before their mincemeat. While that's happening, Chief Astropath Ingmei Singh is sacrificed by Horus to facilitate a meeting with a Chaos God. The Emperor's Children and the Death Guard attack the enemies on Istvan III, only to uncover that they have a War Singer, a badass type of psyker that can fly and emit sounds so powerful they can basically pop your fucking head. Now this sequence does 2 things. It introduces a Death Guard Astartes named Nathaniel Garo, who will be important in a future book, and it shows off Lord Commander Eidolon's new, weird ability to also emit a violently loud shriek, which is a power that Space Marines do not have. Suspicious. Saul Tarvitz is back and notices this too, and when he asks about it, he's shown a bunch of fucked up experiments that the Emperor's Children apothecary, Fabio, is doing. Saul rejects being experimented on himself and pieces out. Meanwhile, Loken, Torgadon, and Lucius of the Emperor's Children are all sent to the surface of Istvan III, and a few characters start to take notice of the weird, hand-picked roster of the assault force, especially Saul, who manages to stay on board the fleet despite being part of that roster to be sent planet-side. He does a bit of sleuthing and finds out that the gun deck is being loaded with lethal virus bombs to fire upon the planet while thousands upon thousands of Astartes are still there, meaning they're about to be betrayed and murdered by the Primarchs. Saul gets the fuck out of there by stealing a small transport ship and heading to the surface himself to warn as many Astartes as possible. But he's pursued by his fellow Emperor's children, until he's contacted by his close friend in the Death Guard, Nathaniel Garro, who was intended to be down on Isstvan III himself, but his prior injuries saved him. Saul tells Nathaniel what he saw and of the impending betrayal, and of course Nathaniel is dumbfounded and can scarcely believe it, but he knows his friend Saul is not a liar, and in an incredible act of trust, he shoots down Saul's pursuers, allowing him to go to Isstvan III. And then Nathaniel lies about shooting Saul down and then prepares to enter the warp to bring word of the betrayal back to Terra to inform the Emperor. So on the surface of Isstvan III, Sons of Horus, World Eaters, Emperor's Children, and Death Guard Astartes are fighting a war they don't even know is just a gigantic trap to kill them all because they were deemed too loyal to the Emperor to join Horus in his betrayal. Saul arrives in time to tell Lucius everything, and they split up to warn the other legions. Meanwhile, Keeler has a vision of the virus strike and informs Mercedes and Cinderman. Thankfully, most of the Sons of Horus and Emperor's Children are able to find shelter in old bunkers to protect themselves from the virus, but a lot of the World Eaters and Death Guard are not so lucky. The virus bomb is super fucked up and spreads insanely fast, infecting Astartes and Isstvan citizens, killing them by basically decaying them very rapidly, turning them into horrible piles of rancid, melted flesh or something, and some of the survivors can only watch from the safety of the bunkers. Just completely horrifying shit. But it still doesn't stop there. By rapidly decaying millions of people like that, a ton of methane gas is released into the air of the planet. And the second part of the bombing begins. A firestorm that ignites that gas, and basically lights the fucking atmosphere on fire, which is also horrifying, but also kinda sounds cool if I'm being completely honest. In the fleet above the surface, Horus has collected a bunch of remembrancers in a room and shows them the bombing before he orders his men to kill them all. Again, Astartes who hate remembrancers are very suspicious. Thankfully, Keeler, Mercedes, and Cinderman are able to slip away and find Iacton Cruz, an elderly Astartes of the Sons of Horus who is often dismissed as annoying and bothersome and being too much of a boomer, but that treatment has allowed him to escape being sent to Isstvan III despite not being loyal to Horus. Cruz takes the humans away to save them from harm, but they're interrupted by that freak Maggard who is more enhanced than ever. Cruz fights him, but they're pretty evenly matched until Cinderman steps in and helps by blowing a hole in Maggard's body with his own pistol, which allows Cruz to take him out for good. They all steal their own transport ship and make their way to the Eisenstein, a ship commanded by none other than Nathaniel Garro. Back on the planet's surface, the surviving loyalists have hunkered down to set up a defense against attacking traitors, led by Angron, who stopped waiting for commands from Horus, which of course pisses him off, but he sends support anyway. Saul Tarvitz, who says repeatedly throughout his appearances across these 3 books that he has no ambition to become a leader, ends up being a fantastic leader of the loyalist forces. But Lucius becomes jealous of this, which isn't a surprise at all because he's been a cocky, vainglorious asshole every time he's on the page. So, he kills a traitor chaplain of the Emperor's Children and uses his helmet to contact Eidolon to cut a deal. Eventually, Tarvitz discovers Lucius's betrayal when the latter kills a bunch of loyalists, so they fight it out. But Lucius is actually an insanely skilled swordsman, probably the best in the Emperor's Children behind Lord Fulgrim himself probably, so Saul isn't doing too hot, until he copies a super secret special move Loken did to Lucius once before, which is simply dropping his weapon to just straight up punch Lucius in the fucking face. In classic literature convenience, this happens to buy Saul enough seconds for more loyalists to show up and shoot at Lucius, but he escapes. And finally, the closing fight of the book is Loken and Torgadon versus Abaddon and Aximand, the 2 Mournival members who stayed loyal to Horus. They split into 2 pairs, Loken fighting Abaddon and Torgadon fighting Aximand. Unfortunately, Torgadon is defeated and killed, and Aximand is clearly not happy about it. Between him and Abaddon, it was Aximand who was the most reluctant about siding with Horus, but by killing his former Mournival companion, he's basically forced himself to commit to the path of treachery. This also leaves Loken alone to fight Abaddon, who is beefed up thanks to the fact he's wearing Terminator armor. Before the fight finishes, a Titan steps on the building they're in, causing the roof to fall, and the two traitors decide to hightail it out of there before the location is bombed again. Loken emerges from the rubble, and he and the remaining few loyalists can only stand and watch on as those bombs begin to fall from the sky. And that finishes Galaxy in Flames, and it continues the non-stop escalation that False Gods started, ending in horrible disaster. The virus bombing and firestorm of Isstvan III is incredibly violent and tragic, as is the loss of Torgadon and, allegedly, Loken. If I had to rank the three books, I would say Horus Rising is up front, followed by Galaxy in Flames, mainly because of the entire last act, and then False Gods. Now I think the main reason False Gods is in third is because McNeil's prose feels really different after coming off Abnet's, who set such an incredible first impression, but I do enjoy all three of them overall though. Now, excuse me for being toxic all of a sudden, but I have seen some people do a whole pathetic woe is me song and dance because they don't like anyone who isn't Abnet or a select few other top tier 40k writers, but that's not me. Frankly, I honestly think those people are being picky as hell and don't fully appreciate what really bad writing is. Now, I do agree that Horus Rising is the best of the three in terms of prose, but come on, there's no need to be a drama queen about it. Now, by the time I finished False Gods, though, I realized the Horus Heresy was definitely going to be one of those sagas that absolutely goes on simply because some characters are a little too dumb to stop it earlier than they could. Like, it is really crazy to me that no one really pushed back harder against Erebus showing up pretty much out of nowhere and immediately whispering in Horus's ear. How it took so long for him to set off any alarms in anyone, let alone Loken, is almost too bizarre. But that is related to what I do like about these books, which is the sense of fraternity between Space Marines. There's one little moment in Horus Rising where they're leaving the secret lodge and Torgadon reaches up to slap a pipe over his head, if I remember correctly, then Loken does the same, just because. And that's such a little moment, but it's also such a dude thing. Their brotherhood is what leads some of them to making huge but good decisions, like Nathaniel Garro actually choosing to believe Saul, but sometimes it also leads them to bad decisions, like, well, betraying the Imperium with Horus. Loyalty is a huge theme in this universe and how it ties to positive and negative impacts, because in some contexts, loyalty can be bad, especially when you're loyal to the point where you never ask questions. It also shows that the Astartes are also pretty naive at times. Despite their power and despite how long-lived they are, some of them approaching or passing 200 years old. Religion is also a big thing here, especially the weird, cyclical nature of it where the Emperor worked so hard to get rid of religion and superstition only to end up not just being worshipped as a god himself, but some of them are able to also somehow channel his power to vanquish evil. How can you not be a bit swayed into religious adjacent beliefs when you see shit like that happen right in front of your eyes? And also, we see a few clear examples of the Crusade itself being kinda fucked up and awful, shown by the fact that the Imperium is so ready and willing to straight up cull their own human cousins who also came from the same Terra they came from. It's a common trope in sci-fi where humans are considered the most violent and stupid race out of all of them because we value and love war and murder, and we go to war with our own kind so often, but this is taking it to an even more extreme level. Also, we have the Eldar, who clearly want to start screaming slurs every time they even look at a human. But anyway, that concludes my first 3 reads into my deep dive into 40k lore. I'm looking forward to reading more, not just the 30k Horus Heresy stuff, but also the more current 40k era stuff that probably has a whole bunch of different tones and settings. And maybe I'll do another video of my next 3 reads. Now before I close this video out, please consider checking out my merch store. As of right now, I have 2 shirt designs, a sliced skull and a tribute to Hironobu Sakaguchi, creator of the Final Fantasy series. I also have a beanie with my logo embroidered on it, great for the cold weather. Both shirt designs are available in lightweight fabric and heavyweight cotton. I've already received samples of everything for quality checking, and I can confirm they look great in person. If you're interested, visit mildconviction.com or check the store tab of my YouTube channel page. This concludes my experience with diving into Warhammer 40k lore with the first 3 Horus Heresy books. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you around.